Hey, Brian Kelly here from Zombie Guitar. Here in this video I want to explain to you why the cage system doesn't make sense if you don't know what the goal of the system is in the first place. So the cage system makes perfect sense. It's a great system. I love it. I think every guitar player should learn it and understand it. But if you don't understand what the goal of it is, then it's not going to make any sense to you. So in this video, I'm going to explain, the common, I guess you could call it a misconception, just kind of the general questions I see being asked all the time and the general answers that are given to those questions all the time. And a lot of people just seem to be confused about this cage system. Why should they learn it? What's it all about? And a lot of people, it just doesn't make sense for them. So in this video, I'm going to explain to you why it doesn't make sense and what to do about it. All right, so let's first start off by identifying the problem. So I've been following, question and answers on Facebook group posts and Reddit posts and forums and stuff like that for at least 15 years now. So I see the same questions being asked all the time. I see the same answers being given all the time. I have a pretty good understanding of where people are getting stuck at, and the cage system is always one of those places. So someone always asks the question, how do I learn to solo across the fretboard? And someone will always give the answer, you got to learn your cage system. So you got to understand that these two people are in two totally different places in their guitar journey. The person asking that question usually is only about a year or two into their guitar playing journey. The person giving that answer is usually much, much more experienced. So there's a very large disconnect there. So the person that says to learn the cage system, that's something that they probably figured out. They've come to find that that's what broke them through their specific plateau. The person asking that question, they're not there yet. The person asking that question is just trying to figure out how to solo. Maybe they know how to solo within a 4-fret area, and they're trying to learn how to, expand and solo in different areas of the fretboard. So they're at a much different place than this person that's giving the advice is at. So this person, they go and they research the cage system, and they come to find out that it's a system of movable chord shapes, and that's exactly what it is. The cage system will allow you to play any chord anywhere on the fretboard. Major chords, minor chords, extended chords, it doesn't matter what. You can play any chord anywhere on the entire neck of the guitar, and having an understanding of the cage system will help you to do exactly that. But the person learning to solo across the entire fretboard, they come and they start to research this cage system, and they find out, okay, I could take a C chord, I could play it like this, or I could take a C chord and then move it to here in a different shape, or I could play it here, or I could play it here. So there's a bunch of different ways to play this C chord. And then they're like, okay, so now what? How does that teach me to solo across the fretboard? So maybe they're like, okay, so if I'm soloing over a chord progression that contains a C major chord, I can play here, and I know the notes to kind of focus on over a C major chord. But what about all the stuff around it? I don't want to just play the notes of the C major chord. There's all kinds of other stuff that people do, all kinds of, little licks and phrases and bends and slides and all kinds of cool stuff. This system is just telling you how to play the C major chord. So how is that really helping them? That's because there's a whole half that they're missing out on. I call it the 2-layer approach. The first layer is the key scale. The second layer is the chord tones. So the cage system is just the second layer. But without understanding the first layer, none of this is going to make sense. So that's what this video is about. So let me give you an example and show you what I'm talking about. So let's stick with the C major chord for now. So the thing to understand is that the C major chord consists of just 3 notes. You have the notes C, E, and G. Now you have C's, E's, and G's all up and down the entire neck of the guitar, and the location of those notes is always going to remain constant. So you can take a C major chord in the open shape like this, and you have a note C here, E, G, C, and E. That's always going to be constant. You have a C here, 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 here. So you have C's all over the place, and that is always going to be the same, all right? Same thing with the note E. Here's an E, here's an E, here's an E, here's an E, here's an E. So again, you have C's, E's, and G's all over the entire neck of the guitar. So let's look at them all. All right, so what you see here is you see all the C's, all the E's, and all the G's all up and down the entire neck of the guitar. So you can play a C major chord using this shape. You can use a C major chord in this shape. You could play a C major chord in this shape. You could play C major like this, like this. So those are all the different ways to play the C major chord. So let's just kind of focus on this one right here. This is your C major chord in the E shape. It's also known as just a regular bar chord with its root on the low E string. So you have your notes C, G, C, E, G, and C. C major chord. So the person that's learning to solo across the fretboard, they may think, all right, so I can solo in this area, and when a C major chord comes along, I know that these are the notes I should hit, because those are going to be the notes that are going to sound good over the C major chord, and that's correct. The problem is, what are the other notes to hit? You know, what about all the slides? What about the bends? What about all those other cool licks and phrases that happen around the notes of the C major chord? So they may reasonably assume that the C major scale would be the other notes to use. And that's not a bad thing to assume, but that's not always going to be the right answer. So I'm now going to give you 3 demos showing you what it sounds like if I were to play over 3 different chord progressions, focusing on the notes of the C major chord and trying to use the C major scale. You're going to hear that it doesn't always sound good. So let's check out that demo, and then I'll explain what happened. So as you saw in that demo, the first example sounded good, but the second 2 didn't really sound good. Why not? I was playing a C major chord. I was focusing on the notes of the C major chord every time the C major chord occurred. And the surrounding notes that I was using were the notes from the C major scale, but it sounded good in the first example, but it didn't really sound good in the second 2 examples. Why not? That's because the context changed. So I was limiting myself to just playing between the 8th and the 12th fret here, using this C major shape, and then the C major scale pattern that I was using to solo over each of those demos was also right there. And then all these other notes are also part of that same pattern within that area. So actually it was 8th to 13th fret. Anyway, so why didn't it sound good in the second two demos, but it did in the first demo? That's because the context changed. So in the first example, I was playing over a C major to G major to A minor to F major. So how do I know what key that was in? Well, you look at your circle of fifths, you look at the chords that are found in a grouping of 6, you see which grouping of 6 it falls into, and then that's your key. So C major, G major, A minor, and F major, they all fall into this grouping of 6 right here. That tells me that the key of that progression is C major. So in that case, the C major scale sounded good. When you're playing in key, as long as you're playing the correct key scale, so I'm in the key of C major, so I should be playing the C major scale over that entire progression, and everything's going to sound good. And that's why, because that's the correct key. And then when the C major chord occurs in that progression, I have certain notes that I'm going to focus on over that specific chord. The surrounding notes that I'm going to use are going to be the notes of the C major scale, though. So everything was all good in that example. But then in the second example, I was playing this chord progression, F major to C major to D minor to B flat major. So that was the second progression. So now we're in a different key. So again, using your circle of fifths, see where all those chords fall, which grouping of 6 fits that progression. It's this grouping of 6 now. This is the key of F major now. So even though there's a C major chord in this progression, I'm now in a different key signature. Therefore, the surrounding notes, when I get to the C major chord, the notes of the C major chord are still going to sound good, but the context is going to change. The surrounding notes is no longer the C major scale. The surrounding notes is the F major scale. So when I tried to force a C major scale in that progression, stuff just wasn't working. It's because I was playing the wrong key. And then the same thing is true for the third progression. The third progression, I was playing G major, D major, E minor, C major. So looking at that progression, looking at those 4 chords, using my circle of fifths to figure out what grouping of 6 of those chords fall into, you see that all those chords fall into this grouping of 6. So that's the key of G major. So, again, when you get to the C major chord, those are going to be the best sounding notes to play over the C major chord, but the stuff that I'm supposed to play around that should be the notes of the G major scale. So you have to understand the concept of what scale to play in addition to what notes to play within the scale on a per chord basis. And that's where this disconnect is. That's what a lot of people don't understand about this CAGED system, and that's the first layer of the puzzle. That's very, very, very important. So how do you learn the CAGED system? So this video here is not about me teaching you the CAGED system. I made a super detailed lesson on the CAGED system. It's a 45-minute long video. It's called 9 Steps to Understanding the CAGED System Fully. I'll post a link to that below. I'll post a link to both the YouTube version of that lesson, in case you want to stay on YouTube, but I will also post a link to the website version, the Zombie Guitar website version, which doesn't have any ads in the video, and it also includes a written lesson, a very long written lesson, including all the charts, all the diagrams that are used in the video. A very, very comprehensive lesson on the CAGED system. Highly recommend you watch that video if you really want to learn the ins and outs of the CAGED system and how it can apply to any chord, any type of chord, anywhere in the entire neck of the guitar. Definitely check that out. So what should you learn first? Should you learn the scales or should you learn the CAGED system first if the goal is to solo across the fretboard? Well, in my opinion, I would suggest learning the scales first. Learn how to figure out what key a chord progression's in. Once you figure out the key of the chord progression, then apply the correct key scale. So if you figure out that the chord progression's in the key of E minor, all right, then you're going to play the E minor scale using any pattern that you'd like all up and down the entire neck of the guitar, and you're going to play that E minor scale over all the chords. Don't really worry about playing on a per chord basis right away. Just worry about playing the E minor scale over the entire progression. If you do that, everything's going to sound good. That's going to get you to where you're trying to get to much faster. Years later, you're going to come to find, all right, so I'm playing the same licks, I'm playing the same phrases, my lead playing isn't sounding as connected with the chords as much as I would like. That's the point where you're going to say, okay, now it's time to dive into this CAGED system. I already know how to play the scales. I can play in key really well. Now I really want to kind of hone in on very specific notes on a per chord basis, and that's where the CAGED system will really come in handy. So again, it's a two-layer approach. The key scale is the first layer. The chord tones within the key scale are the second layer. And even if you're not playing something that's in key, even if you're playing something that's constantly changing keys, some kind of complex jazz progression, it still doesn't matter. Context, context, context. So that's that's the way that I would personally recommend learning this stuff. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to ask. Thanks for watching.